Hi there. So today we'll learn the difference between NTLM and Kerberos for the CEH version 13
Hey
exam.
everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the invisible architecture that actually keeps corporate networks secure and, well, on the flip side, how attackers manage to tear that architecture down. We're going to be looking at Microsoft Windows authentication. Specifically, our goal today is to really explain the difference between the Kerberos authentication and the NTLM authentication process. I mean, if you've ever logged into a work computer, you've used these systems. But understanding exactly how they verify your identity behind the scenes, that is absolutely crucial for modern cybersecurity and, of course, ethical hacking.
Okay, let's just quickly run through our agenda for today. First up, we're going to cover Windows password security basics. Number 2, NTLM, the legacy protocol. 3, Kerberos, the modern standard. 4 will be a head-to-head comparison. And finally, number 5, how hackers exploit them. All right. Let's dive right in with Section 1, Windows Password Security Basics. So before we even get into the network authentication side of things, we really need to understand how your computer remembers who you are locally. Think of the Security Accounts Manager or the SAM database as the fundamental bank vault of your Windows operating system. See, Windows doesn't actually save your password in readable plain text. If your password is, say, password123, Windows runs that through a mathematical algorithm to generate this scrambled string of characters, which we call a one-way hash. It stores this hash right in the SAM database file, which is heavily locked down by the OS kernel. And this is your baseline security, right? Even if someone somehow peeks inside the vault, they're just seeing scrambled hashes, not your actual passwords. But as we'll see a bit later, hackers have found some pretty clever ways to use those hashes anyway.
Moving right along to Section 2, NTLM, the legacy protocol.
Now that we know how passwords are saved, how do we actually use them to log in across a network? Well, enter NTLAN Manager, or NTLM. It acts kind of like a security guard checking your ID at the door, and it uses this really clever challenge and response system. Here's how it works. You send a login request, and instead of just asking for your password, the server sends you a challenge. It's a 16-byte random string called a nonce. Your computer takes that nonce, encrypts it using your secret password hash, and hands it right back. Meanwhile, the server goes and grabs your hash from its own SAM database, encrypts the original nonce itself, and then compares its math with yours. If the encrypted strings match, boom, you're in. The real genius here is that your actual plaintext password, and honestly, even your hash, never actually travels across the network.
So NTLM sounds pretty secure, right? I mean, the password never crosses the network. So why in the world did Microsoft phase it out as the default standard? Well, NTLM has some pretty fundamental structural flaws. Mainly, it's a one-way authentication street. The server verifies the client, sure, but the client doesn't verify the server. And that leaves the door wide open for attackers to just impersonate the server. Plus, by modern measures, it really lacks strong cryptographic standards. Microsoft knew they needed something way more robust.
Which brings us to Section 3, Kerberos, the modern standard.
This is the highly sophisticated system that currently protects modern Microsoft domains and Active Directory environments. Kerberos completely changes the game by providing strong, mutual authentication using secret key cryptography. And that word, mutual, is absolutely crucial here. The server verifies the user, yes, but the user also verifies the server. Literally, no one is taking anything on faith. And instead of just a direct conversation between your computer and the server you're trying to access, Kerberos brings a trusted third party into the mix. To really grasp how this works, we need to decode some of the terminology.
Okay, I know this looks like complete alphabet soup, but an amusement park analogy actually makes it crystal clear. So the KDC, or Key Distribution Center, is essentially the main ticket booth at the park entrance. Inside that booth, you have the AS, the authentication server, and the TGS, the ticket granting server. When you first log in for the day, the AS verifies your identity and hands you a TGT, a ticket-granting ticket. Just think of the TGT as your all-day VIP wristband. Now later on, when you want to ride a specific roller coaster, say, access a file server, you don't show your password again. You just flash your wristband to the ticket-granting server and it hands you a specific token, a service ticket, just for that one ride. You hand that ticket to the file server and you're good to go. It is an incredibly secure, seamless, single sign-on experience.
All right, let's move to Section 4, head-to-head comparison.
Let's stack these two right up next to each other, because this brilliantly illustrates the real difference between the Kerberos authentication and the NTLM authentication process. As you can see, NTLM relies on a one-way challenge response. It interacts directly with the server using hashed passwords. Kerberos, on the flip side, demands mutual authentication. It uses that trusted third party, the KDC, and relies on a really sophisticated ticketing system powered by secret key cryptography. Because of all this, Kerberos protects against things like replay attacks and network eavesdropping far better than NTLM ever could. It really is the absolute fortress of modern Active Directory.
Finally, Section 5. How hackers exploit them.
If you're involved in ethical hacking, you quickly learn that absolutely no system is bulletproof. To defend a network, we really have to look at how attackers dismantle these exact protocols. Let's look at NTLM first. Remember that SAM vault full of hashes we talked about earlier? Well, in a pass-the-hash attack, hackers using tools like Mimikatz, they don't even bother trying to crack your password. They literally just steal the hash itself and inject it directly into the authentication stream. And the crazy thing? The server just accepts it as valid. Then we have poisoning. If a user mistypes a server name, Windows will sometimes broadcast a request out to the whole network asking, "Hey, who is this?" Attackers use tools like Responder to basically raise their hand and falsely claim, "Oh, I'm that server," tricking the victim's machine into handing over its net NTLM v2 hash. And finally, NTLM relay attacks. This is where they simply intercept an authentication request in transit and forward it onto a target server, essentially riding the coattails of a legitimate user to gain unauthorized access.
Now, Kerberos is definitely a tougher nut to crack, for sure. But the exploits here, they are devastating. The ultimate prize for a hacker in an Active Directory environment is the golden ticket attack. If an attacker can somehow extract the master NTLM hash of the KDC's own service account, known as the KRBTGT account, they can literally forge their own ticket granting tickets. They essentially own the amusement park's ticket printer, granting themselves full, unrestricted administrative control over the entire domain. It's game over. A silver ticket is a similar concept, but it just forges a ticket for one specific service instead of the whole domain. We also see offline cracking attacks. In Kerberosting, an attacker requests a valid service ticket, which happens to be partially encrypted with a target service account's hash. They extract this ticket from memory, take it completely offline, and brute force it on their own hardware to eventually reveal the plain-text password. And ASREP roasting works similarly, targeting accounts that don't have pre-authentication enabled.
Which brings us to our final slide and honestly, a core philosophy from the EC Council's ethical hacking program. If you want to stop hackers from invading your network, first you've got to invade their minds. You simply cannot just rely on Kerberos being a quote-unquote secure protocol. You have to understand that attackers are constantly out there looking for misconfigurations, like those accounts without pre-authentication, or they're targeting the very hashes that make the entire system function. Security isn't just about deploying the right protocol. It's about anticipating exactly how the adversary is going to try and break it. So I want to leave you with the thought. In your own organization's network, are you just going around checking to make sure the locks are clicked shut, or are you actively thinking like the lockpicker? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning and stay secure.